I'm Alana,
And I'm Jesse.
and we are making matches. Um, so welcome to Not Your Bubby's Torah School, where we talk about all things Jewish that we wish we learned in Torah school. Today we're talking about, and I am going to try to pronounce this correctly with no practice, um, Al Ta'amod Al Dam Reyacha, my
Yep.
best go, which means do not stand idly by the blood of your friend. And this is part of our July series on how Jewish principles and ethics and values support anti-Zionism. So welcome. Let's just jump in with like what is al ta'amod al dam reacha.
Yeah. So the concept that this became in the Torah stems from older Jewish texts too, and there's a lot of sources for it. But the concept is basically that you do not stand by while your neighbor is suffering, or specifically, there's some interpretations that where they are bleeding, where there's violence, where there's harm being done to your fellow kinsmen, you do not stand by. And in our modern interpretations as Reform Jews, I will speak just as a Reform Jew, we interpret that to mean that we cannot stand idly by when somebody's life is being threatened or someone is being harmed. Do you agree? Is that kind of the background
Yeah,
of it?
that's like my understanding. Um, and like in the hierarchy of like values and things that are asked of us by the Torah, like saving a life or like not just, being a bystander, so to speak, is a priority. So like supersedes all other priorities. And this is from an article that says it mandates virtually unlimited effort. So like trying to the absolute best of your ability, no matter what the risk is, to not to save someone's life or to not be standing idly by while someone is in fatal danger or danger in general, which I thought was interesting. And there are all these caveats, like even if the risk is like unclear or small, like any risk to life mandates that intervention. Even when there's no guarantee that the life will be saved, you still have to
Mm.
try. Even when um, the life that is being saved, they say if quote unquote is like of low quality, but basically like
Mm.
I think that could mean within our society, yeah, like even if it is someone who you do not deem worthy of saving generally, like that doesn't matter like how like your vision of someone or your perception of someone, like because they are a person, like they are worth saving. um and like, even if this is like an older person or someone who's ill and their life is expected to be shorter, like that also doesn't matter. So yeah, it just basically like overarchingly, I think basically it would be like unless you are at super high risk of yourself like dying on behalf of doing this, like it is a priority that you intervene.
Yeah, I love it. I some reason thought of like Jewish superhero type stuff in this with like the idea that like we save everyone and like there's no life that's too small and just kind of there's like I could go into a whole Jewish superhero backstory comic strip thing, but like just the idea
I
that
love that.
this is, I think, taken for granted, I think, in mostly like in our Western society, that it's like to be a good person, right? You like I also think of like Grey's Anatomy or whatever. You like try to save a life, like it's a whole philosophy that we accept as true. But I think Judaism should get some credit for this because I don't know that this exists everywhere prior to Torah.
Yeah, and like I was about to go on a tangent that is not relevant. Let's just keep it pushing. What I see that you have here is something about being related to Lashon Hara. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, just quickly because like we talked about last week with the verse before the ethic, we wanted to like contextualize, and so the verse right before this verse is, you shall not deal basely with your kinsman, is some interpretations, but is also interpreted to be like, you shall not go up and down as a slanderer among your people. And then the next line is, you shall not stand by the blood of your neighbor, and so in some interpretations, like some people read that as just two separate concepts, that like you don't harm your fellow person. Also, if somebody is being harmed, you stand up. But I really like, there's this great essay by Rabbi Mark Dratch that says, it's called Let Them Talk, the Mitzvah to Speak Lashon Hara, about kind of pushing back on the idea that Lashon Hara is always bad. But we've already done a whole session on that. So if you would like to revisit it, please go back and listen. But that the idea that the verse should read, you shall not go up and down as a slanderer among your people, but nevertheless, you shall not stand by the blood of your neighbor. So it means, we don't just harm people verbally and make up lies and do, things because we feel like it. But also, if someone's doing something bad, we need to stand up and say something, and he continues, this obligation includes protection not only from physical harm, but protection from monetary and spiritual harm as well, which is intense in our modern
Yeah.
society, of the amount of spiritual harm being done.
And monetary. Yeah, like that makes me think, like, what does it mean if we're not doing everything we can to ensure that like people are like not living in poverty in our country? Like
Mm-hmm.
if we want to, start with like a US basis, there are so many things that are happening in our own country that most, if not all of us, are standing idly by for, that absolutely would qualify as like monetary, spiritual, physical harm,
Mm-hmm.
that we are not engaging in. So, even if you can't get behind what we're about to go into, but you are someone who wants to be following Jewish values, like theoretically, this would mean like, yeah, engaging in making sure people have their base needs met. Um, Also, just to highlight, because I can't remember if we did this like ethic and this like part of the Torah is in Leviticus. In what is it, Vayakara, Vay
Is it
Vayikra?
Vayikra?
Yeah,
And it's not that far away from, it might be the exact same part that we got our last Hokiak to, yeah, from. Still not confident how to say that.
they had a lot of stuff in there. They were like, we're gonna get into it.
Roll it all in the middle.
So, yeah, I mean, now that we have sort of an understanding of what this means, how can that be a justification for anti-Zionism? If that wasn't sort of like made obvious in the way that I think we were talking about it. Um, I think like most clearly, if, we have this obligation to intervene when our neighbor, but like, any human being is being harmed, then that means we have an obligation to intervene when Palestinians are being harmed by the Israeli government and army, especially when Judaism is being used, again, coming back to this, as the justification and the reason for that harm. Um, and so, right, you can't, it would be hard to deny that there is like physical violence and harm being inflicted on Palestinian civilians. And with this ethic in mind, like we have an obligation to prevent that from happening at all costs. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think of, modern day violence against Palestinians, and I also think of the Zionist colonial project and our obligation, right? If this means we cannot stand by when people are spiritually being, crushed, we also have to teach our real
Mhm.
history of what happened in the formation of the Jewish state. We have to teach the Nakba. We have to really acknowledge the ways in which the Zionist project effectively uh, created a lot of harm in Palestine. And I think
Yeah.
that we, as a Reformed Jewish community and as a larger Jewish community, we don't do enough of acknowledging the ways that we have stood by when the blood of our neighbor is being shed. And we focus on like, we'll do better. And, you know, we missed the mark this year. And like, but there is still a lot that we need to make up for in terms of like restoring the spiritual respect and dignity to Palestine.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that goes for literally any colonial movement. And, we, even if it's not technically ongoing, like we can still be involved in reparations for that harm. Um, I think that the part where it's like, even if there is like a risk to you, or like you don't really know if you're going to be able to help, being like a part of this is really important to highlight, because I think that a like justification for Israel or for like not being anti-Zionist is that like, well, like Jews are in danger and we also need a place to be safe, which, yes, I'm not going to deny that like anti-Semitism isn't real. I experience it as a Jewish person constantly, and I always have. And as we know, there's like an uptick in like physical violence and harm. And it makes a lot of sense that Jews deserve to be safe. And that's something that like matters to me because I'm a Jewish person who deserves to be safe. However, two things can exist at one time, and we can want Jewish people to be safe while also not having that be at the expense of Palestinian death and violence enacted by the Israeli government onto Palestinian civilians. And this goes beyond just like, bodily harm, but it is, and especially if we're talking about protection from like monetary and spiritual harm and like harm in general, like this also is about like settlements, and this also is about like the harm of taking away people's homes and people's towns and like relocating people, and separating families and imprisoning people, like even beyond the fact that Palestinian civilians are like murdered or injured. But we are obligated to intervene at harm at all of the levels that it's happening at, because it's all violent.
Absolutely.
So yeah. Do you have anything else, or should we close it out?
No, I think that was really well said.
I feel like we're doing really good on timing with this. The outline thing really makes a difference. The
Turns out
outline. Yeah.
preparing, yeah, which is all you. So thank you for it.
Well, shout out to Matt and Kaylin from Bucking the Fine Print, because if we had not done a collab with them, yeah, I don't know if I would have been like, oh, making an outline is a good idea. So shout out to them. And if you're listening to us on Spotify, we are excited to put that series on Spotify at some point, because it was really fun and really good, and they're awesome, and you should check them out. All that being said, that's it for Al Ta'amad Al Dam Reyacha. We will be back next Thursday, same time, same place, most likely. And we're going to be talking about Ometz Lev, which is strength, or like heart strength. And how that, as a Jewish ethics, is also in support of anti-Zionism. So yeah, feel free to listen back to the weeks that we've already done that are on Spotify or Apple Podcast, wherever you're listening. And if you want any sources that we used for this episode, we are always happy to share. So just send us an email at makingmenches@gmail.com, or a DM on our Instagram, and we would be happy to share those sources with you. Also, shout out to Nate Naybird on Instagram for making our very cool and wonderful and exciting intro and outro music. We're super excited about that. Okay, see y'all next week. Bye,
Right.
Daisy.
Bye.